My summer break had finally arrived, and it was filled with many joys. One of the great thrills it held was a very energetic and lovable kitten, who I enjoyed playing with immensely. Unfortunately, the kitten wasn't mine, and instead he belonged to my roommate, or ex-roommate should I say. He was the one who offered me a place to stay after the college dorms had kicked all the students out at spring semester's end. His name was Hobbs, and he was 9 months old, although I wouldn't have known at first glance that this monstrous cat was only a mere 8 months in age when I first moved in. He had white fur all over with auburn patches that swelled around, and black innocent babbles for eyes with a curious and dazzled expression on his face. It felt just like there was a small child in the apartment, and when I'd pet him or he'd follow me around, his gaze and body movements resembled a young child's playfulness and shy uncertainty of the world. He hung to my coattails to be guided, supported, fed and cared for. His rightful owner, Andrew, now lived with his girlfriend, but Hobbs remained behind. I questioned this move, but each time I pressed my roommate, he simply replied, "I'm sorry, I simply have nowhere else to put him," and that was the most I would get out of his reasoning. I even recommended that Andrew looked into finding some alternative if any existed, like in loving company of other family members that lived far away, so that the option of Hobbs remaining at the apartment could be a last resort. Don't get me wrong, I'm very attached to Hobbs as he is to me, but as I mentioned, I'm not the rightful owner. But alas, Hobbs remained behind, and I evidently had been granted full custody. The end of the month arrived once again, and it was time to collect my roommate Louise's money and put it in with mine so the rent could be paid. There was an ATM where I could deposit the money on campus and have it with my account to pay rent by the next morning. The ATM machine was a good 25 to 30 minute walk from my apartment. With the checks in hand, I gathered my belongings and prepared to make somewhat of a lengthy trek. Hobbs, who I now adored despite the times he had woken me early in the morning yearning for human affection, meowed frantically and ran in the usual circles around me. He then motioned slowly toward the door and sat with his round, white furry belly bunched up around his hind legs. Hobbs wished to be let outside, which was exactly where I was heading. It was not unusual for me to let the kitten outside for hours at a time, for it was obvious he knew where his home was and never wandered far from the front door, weary of anything else that moved outside the apartment. I cracked the door and the kitten squeezed through, beyond my control to keep him from getting out. Not like I wished to restrain such actions. I closed the door behind us, and once I had gone more than a few paces beyond the steps, I looked over my shoulder to see the kitten perched by the oak tree, sitting in his usual sturdy upward posture, observing me fall from sight. I reached the busy street bordering the university and crossed the curvy road on campus through the luring bike path running adjacent to the arboretum, which was a warming and comforting sight even in the dark of night. I didn't check the time before I left the apartment, though I knew it was evening. The colour from the sky had almost completely faded. Beyond the first few fancy lampposts, I noticed I was walking into complete darkness, and every light beyond it was off. I found this quite odd. I had walked down this bike path countless times before, and oftentimes at night, and before tonight, it was always perfectly well lit. I will admit, the dark makes me a little uneasy, but I have no major phobias for it, so I decided to keep walking on this path as normal, temporarily leaving behind the light of civilization. The bike path arched around for a little while, and eventually when I looked back, I found myself surrounded by darkness, but I could still make out the various overgrowths and tall trees leaning over the fence. I still felt a small level of comfort, but the tense feeling of unease was rising inside me. I began to feel like someone or something was approaching me, but when I turned around, I could only see blackness and no noticeable movement. A few more paces towards my destination, I heard it, but it was very faint. The sound seemed far away, but was certainly coming from behind me. I froze, and without turning around, I heard it again, a cat's meow. I felt chills. It was very odd because I had never encountered a single cat on this bike path. Not only that, this particular cat seemed to be following me, coming straight away, and I could not tell for exactly how long it had been doing so, but aside from even that, the main reason that I felt so chilled was that it sounded exactly like Hobbs, in the same manner a frantic cry for attention. I heard it again, coming closer towards me. I finally spun around and squinted in the bleak darkness. I could make out a small silhouette that was drawing nearer, but it wasn't close enough yet. When it finally came within arm's length, I could see from its immature bodily and facial features that it was in fact a mere child, a kitten, while also the same as a full-grown cat. And there was that same expression on its face, curious and dazzled, with two black innocent babbles for eyes. Its fur was brighter than the colours around it, with the same swirly patch of dark fur. I doubted that this could be Hobbs, who had followed me all the way from the apartment, as I wouldn't deem impossible of such a thing without sooner being hit by a car, but the resemblances were eerily similar. As I looked down on this kitten, I simply stared at its face peering back at mine, those two black baubles acknowledging my gaze. I didn't dare pet it, as I didn't know the kitten at all, and found myself suddenly losing interest and turning away. As I did, the kitten ran in front of me towards a grassy patch of land hardly still within sight by the fence, and clawed and nibbled on a few weeds, beginning to chomp away. After a lengthy pause, I finally began heading in the same direction as I had been this whole time. Still feeling a bit creeped out, but I decided that the kitten's resemblance was only a mere coincidence. I felt curiosity growing on me, and finally it got the better of me. I just had to go back over by that fence to get a second look at it. To my dismay, I saw no movement, and I was sure I was looking in the general direction of where the kitten was. As I'd backtracked, I confirmed the kitten had in fact entirely disappeared without a trace. It had probably climbed over the fence without me hearing it, or sprinted away quickly into the heavy darkness, but I still wished that I would have caught sight of that kitten one last time. I finally reached the main part of the campus by the bookstore, student centre and library, where the ATM was waiting for me. Between the main gym area and the path leading to the ATM machines, a few young feminine bodies emerged from behind the corner of the pool and were suddenly right in front of my face. I was taken aback in surprise, but what made me feel particularly creeped out was that eerie silence as they stepped solemnly one foot in front of the other, with not even a hint of response from the cement when their shoes made contact. A few became many, proving the first woman I saw to be the mere frontrunner of a long line of them. The cement still made no sound. These women were all draped in black dresses, similar to what you'd wear to a funeral, and seemed all to be about high school age. Their expressions were mostly blank and seemed pale, and what I found to be particularly odd is that not a single one of them even acknowledged my presence, even though I stood only a few feet away from them. Even this was distancing myself from the position that I had first encountered the figuration of ladies. I suddenly felt quite invisible, as I noticed a uniform emotionless expression on them, with those same downward angled eyes staring at the ground as they solemnly trekked on. I took a few more steps back slowly, noticing how I could audibly make out the sound of my steps immediately, while the tens of bodies that had just intersected my path mere seconds ago were deadly silent. They continued to follow a straight path right past a small gym in the distance now, and I could not make out where the front of the line was anymore from where I was standing. I couldn't imagine what their purpose was being on campus. I mean, from their formation and odd silent behaviour. Anytime I'd seen groups of people from a high school age group, it was clear they were either attending sports, taking a tour exploring the campus, or celebrating an event. I could only assume that these women, that they were rehearsing for some kind of weird act or play, but whatever they were in fact doing, they seemed very serious. And all of those steps with the sound turned completely off, like watching a silent movie. I couldn't make any sense of it. I slapped my face on both cheeks to confirm I was still real and shook off my second spook of the night. At last I arrived at the ATM machine and very quickly sealed the envelope with the deposit amount I needed. The exchange was successful, and my one chore for the night was now complete. I could now turn back and begin my long trek back to the complex. As I made my first crossing past Student Centre, I was amazed to see a homeless person standing there. My body actually jolted back in shock, for I had not been more than a few steps away from this person before I even knew he existed. The homeless man did not even acknowledge my surprise, and stared blankly in my general direction. I responded by keeping my eyes straight forward and trying my best not to appear alarmed. My heart was still pounding out of my chest. "The cat," I heard the homeless man mutter under his breath. I felt my eyes widen a little when I heard it, but I still did my best not to acknowledge the man. The cat, I heard faintly once again. I had made it a few paces past him, at which point I began to power walk. I did not take the bike path again and decided I'd instead take a different scenic route back to my destination through the on-campus dorms. I'd realised that I'd not seen a single rabbit the entire time I'd been walking on campus, which was bizarre. I'd always see at least a few before tonight, and by these dorms most of all, but even here nothing. Totally dead. But of course nothing this night was occurring as it ordinarily should, so I was beginning to expect the unexpected, and as I did, the unexpected kept happening. I was on the other end of the arboretum now, on the opposite adjacent fence, and once again there was a cat in the distance. It was well lit this time, and it was clearly an all-black cat, and its eyes reflected the light, the same fancy lampposts like glass as it watched my approach. This time, I couldn't even get near the cat before it fled, and each time it would stop after a short distance then darted off again and again, peering back at me as I progressed at my normal pace, perhaps slightly faster than my normal pace. I'd realised that I'd not taken my gaze off it for a while, and when I did, I began to notice that I was surrounded by more black cats. They were not drawing any closer to me, and they didn't seem curious about my presence. They just watched, as if they'd expected to see me. If I even tried to take a few steps towards any of them, they would dart away, and I knew I'd never catch any of them. Stranger still, each black cat appeared to be an exact replica of the other, like cat quadruplets, quintuplets, sextuplets. Then I saw something that triggered me to panic. A dead rabbit. It didn't appear that it was eaten because there was no evidence of guts or torn ligaments, or at least from what its backside revealed. The rabbit was just motionless and limp, and I couldn't see its face. It didn't appear as if it even struggled before it died. I could smell that grotesque stench from where I was staring at it, trying to understand the hideous sight revealed before my eyes. I know it's silly to say I was afraid of a dead rabbit, but I felt on edge. These black cats staring directly at me. It hindered me and made me feel all too vulnerable. I suddenly bolted out of there. I did not even stop to think about what I was doing. I just ran. As I did this, I saw another dead rabbit, and I focused my eyes straight ahead of me without moving another muscle in my neck another centimetre, refusing to observe any more murdered or deceased animals that were being laid before my feet. I was unsure of which of the two it was. The black sextuplets dispersed as I ran as if for dear life towards the students' parking structure. I felt like a coward and gathered myself together. I refocused my bearings. I remembered to breathe, and suddenly I wanted to get back home so badly now. I was just so creeped out by what I had seen thus far tonight. I wished I could at the very least see one student walking about in the dorms so I could share my experiences with them and get it off my chest. But there was no one. Suddenly I squinted through the narrow alleyway between the back of the doubles dorm building and parking structure. "What the hell?" I said aloud, looking on. My body became a statue. What I saw were the same configuration of girls in their dark outfits from before. It was unquestionably the same girls I saw when I was near the ATM. A part of me felt curious and wanted to walk through the alleyway to see if they would talk to me, but another side of me, the part I listened to, told me to take the long way around through the parking structure. I hurried before the girls could beat me to the windy road bordering the freeway, and as I crossed the street into the sawdust and elm trees opposite the fence, I could not resist a glance at the face of one of the girls in the line formation. I could see from this viewpoint that each of the girls had a cold, lifeless expression on their face, and was staring down at the same level as my feet were. I swallowed my own spit, and realised the fact that I was craving a meal was not helping the situation. Not a single one of the girls, and I mean no one, even glanced up at me one time, and the overwhelming sense of being invisible I felt from earlier told me that these people would take no notice of me if I just bolted away from them up the curvy path ahead, which is exactly what I did, slipping back into the darkness of the night. I also confirmed what my ears could not tell me earlier when I was a mere feet away from them, and from the soft chirping of crickets that were more audible, I could tell that their steps made no echo into the night. But it was still unexplainable, especially for such a large crowd motioning forward ever slowly. Their feet would give some hint that they were walking and not floating. And they weren't floating. they were walking. And I just didn't want to think about it. I didn't even look back this time, and I began wondering what else could possibly scare me, lurking on ahead and waiting for me in the shadows of obscurity. Even with the mysterious line of female figures not far behind me, I couldn't shake the images of what I'd seen before from my psyche. They were now burned into my memory. Even the encounter with the kitten that had appeared to be almost a clone of Hobbs on the bike path. Trying to erase these images from my head would prove difficult. I suddenly realized as my mind was racing that there was in fact something else that I found rather unsettling, which was that the freeway I was right next to seemed eerily quiet. A wall running along the freeway blocked my view of the passing cars, and each time I progressed about 10-15 steps, the windy sound of cars passing in the opposite direction of the freeway would gradually decrease in volume. Even though this freeway followed closely to the wall that separated it from the path, I was still practically right next to the freeway before the concave road became more twisted, seemingly more than I remembered. As I progressed, hoping to see the straightaway soon enough, the road only became more concave and more twisted still. It seemed as if the bend in the road was copying itself multiple times over, and I got an alarming sense of deja vu. I peeked behind me and the girl formation line was covered from view behind the curved fence, as it had been for a while now. It felt as if the path should have taken me in full circle by now, and I felt incredibly uneasy as the only thing I saw behind and in front of me was seemingly an endless bend. What in the hell was going on? Where was the straightaway? At last, I let out a sigh of relief as the straightaway finally appeared in view. Perhaps I'd been walking slower than I thought, perhaps out of fear, hunger, and paranoia that was getting the best of me by now. I almost thought I'd find myself surrounded by black cats before I saw a straight path again, and the immense relief I felt overpowered the eerie feeling I dreaded just a little while before, and I felt a smile etched on my face. Man, what a creepy night this has been. My relief, however, proved to be short-lived, as another realization occurred to me. Where are all the cars? I'd not seen a single moving vehicle in at least the last few miles. I'd only seen parked cars. The clearing past the oak trees and sawdust trail revealed the same street as before I'd made my way onto the campus, except what the hell? The road was now completely void of moving vehicles and was dead silent. It was supposed to be a busy street and it couldn't have been much later than 9 PM by now, yet the street was clear except for two bodies standing stationary at the turning lane. At this point, not too far from returning from my place of hearth now, my mindset about these seemingly unnatural occurrences radically changed. Could I be dreaming? Or had I somehow entered another dimension or parallel universe? The thought seemed preposterous, of course. But just what the hell was this? I felt like the world was pulling a big prank on me, and it just seemed too realistic to be a dream. I could feel cold sweat on every inch of my body, especially my back and forehead, and the warm night air felt hot against my cheeks. I felt more sweat trickling down my brow, and I could feel my heart pounding, but my sprinting from before probably contributed to this cold sweat more than anything else. I shook off these thoughts for but a moment, and I had only taken a few steps up the hill that led to the bridge over the freeway when I decided that the two people standing motionless in the middle of the street were just bothering me too much. Even though there was still a chance of being spooked, I had to assure myself that these people were the first normal people that I would encounter tonight. As it turns out, I was wrong. I had to shake off the realization that there were no cars coming on either side of this normally busy street as I walked up to these people. I felt a small amount of relief again as I noticed that these two seemed to have a conscience like me, and actually acknowledged my presence. However, one of these two people still had his arm up and was pointing at something off in the distance, and I also noticed that his arm was motionless, yet they still did not speak to me, but simply nodded when we exchanged glances. They were two young men and had buzz cuts. One was a good 6 inches taller than the other in height. Both men wearing clean hoodies and jeans, nothing too out of the ordinary here. The shorter man kept his arm up even as he kept his head tilted towards my direction. After a short frame of silence, still neither one spoke a single word to me, only to each other. "Hey man, I think it's still over there, do you see it?" The shorter man was almost whispering, pointing at the opposite end of the street leading to the university apartments. "How can you see it? I don't see anything. Don't you see where I'm pointing? They're still over there. I don't know what's happening." By this time, curiosity got the better of me, and I decided that I must make one final stop before heading back to my apartment, and I braced myself for what lay waiting for me at the opposite end of this street. One of my friends lived in this complex, so I figured if this little adventure ended out of nowhere, that I could at least stop by his apartment if he was there. Perhaps we could even hang out then, and I could finally share my tale with someone. The road reached the gate and I saw nothing at all, so I shrugged and decided to let myself through the gate into the university apartment complex. I just needed to speak with somebody about my weird night, and my roommate would certainly be getting ready for bed in order to wake up early for work by the time I got back there. At least I knew my friend would still be awake. I was barely inside the complex when I caught something moving in my peripherals, in the direction of where the short man had been pointing. I caught an image of a shadow slowly vanishing behind the back of one of the apartment buildings, but I was confused that what I saw appeared so dark, considering how well lit the area around it was. Behind me, the road was still silent, and I was fed up trying to discern any logic from earlier events. I wanted to hurry over and examine the area of my little sighting, but I noticed instead that the tall pole in the centre of the courtyard seemed different. I remember joking to my friend about this tall pole because there were so many cameras attached to it, appearing to hold no purpose but to ruin people's privacy. I noticed the light illuminating it. It was dimmed and flickering, and I also noticed the cameras attached to the pole. The glass had been smashed. Every single camera on every side of the pole was broken, with glass pieces scattered around in brown and yellow grass. I made a big circle around the pole in case for my own safety, and I suddenly felt concerned for my friend's safety as well. I could hear something off in the distance, but very faintly. Perhaps there were people partying, having a good time. I could only hope. This complex was after all home mainly to the foreign exchange students of the university. I hurried over to my friend's apartment on the far end of the courtyard, and as I came near the front door, I discovered that it was in fact wide open, with one light in the kitchen illuminating the rest of the apartment. A lot of the other doors were open, either with or without lights on, while others remained closed with the blinds shut and no light laying beyond it. I ran inside his apartment, even though he would have no idea I was coming and that I felt on the verge of insanity. My friend's bedroom door was unlocked with the light on his laptop on, but he was nowhere to be found. That's when I heard it. Faintly off in the distance, the chanting. As I left the courtyard square, the voices drew closer and sounded more evil with every step. I still could not make out what a single person was saying. Just a few moments before, I'd thought I'd heard people having fun and socializing, but the tone now evidently appeared dark. I'd given up and I ran towards the noise, regardless of what could be waiting for me. I just needed someone to talk to before my head exploded. But through the labyrinth of more and more buildings, I was getting lost. My mind began wandering, trying desperately to fill myself with happier thoughts. I wonder if Hobbs is getting hungry by now, and just imagining lifting the kitten up playfully and squeezing it gently, saying that I missed him. As these thoughts flashed through my mind, I was instantly pulled out of my daydream by an agonizing, horrible high-pitched scream, piercing deep into my ear sockets. This terrifying, nightmarish sound insinuated a direct response to my thoughts, pulling me right back into the madness and taunting me. This cry did not belong to a human, but they were instead the distant wailing shrieks of a single creature. A cat. I ran in a zigzag around every barrier in my way, drawing closer and closer to the shrieks. The chanting became more haunting and aggressive, and there were no discernible words to be heard, all in some different language. More buildings, more buildings. I could only wince at the shrieking that ripped through my eardrums, but I needed to see so badly just what the hell was happening. I could only wonder what was left to the imagination. What could I possibly stumble upon next that was worse than the horrors the bleak night had already presented me? At last I came to a clearing, and I could not have prepared myself for what I saw. Those same black gowns, and there were black suits too, within the same emotionless expressions as the girls, walking in formation as I'd already seen twice before. But they were chanting now, joined with men as well. There was no sign of my friend, not like I would ever expect him to be a part of a cult, but expecting the unexpected had been working for me thus far. I'd figured out pretty quickly that I was right about the cries, and I covered my eardrums and went into the fetal position. My mind yelled at me, "Why did you have to bring yourself here? You know that you didn't want to see this. This will now scar me for life." Despite my vicious thoughts, another part of me, that other side to my psyche, forced me to look. And now I felt a slave to stare at the madness unfolding from a distance. In the center of the circular formation, by 4 tiny blood-spattered sakes, were 3 cats lying on the ground as lifeless corpses, drained of life from a single stab wound in the chest and covered in their own blood. There were also 4 cages with 3 cats inside, making none of the hissing noises I would expect in an attempt to defend themselves. Instead, they appeared to be sleeping next to a single fluorescent lamp, the type used to light a picnic table camping out in the woods. One cage stood empty, and a young woman stepped solemnly forward to the darkness to present a token, murmuring a chant pattern as the others near her took their turn to chant the same repeating unknown phrases. I apparently had a death wish, because at this moment, I felt compelled to halt her progress. I would march straight up there without a second thought, to get a close look at her face and see what she was holding. But wait, this isn't right. No, it can't possibly be. Hobbs? Hobbs! I nearly shouted, but the kitten did not turn toward me. It could not turn toward me. Like the cat in the cages, it had evidently been drugged and was motionless. The woman, or rather teenage girl, turned slowly towards me, presenting both her arms in the present they held. "Does this one belong to you?" Her voice sounded surprisingly normal, but it was lacking in natural speech patterns. "Yes, I mean, it has to be. The kitten looks too similar." But again, I could not know if my words held true. But everything about this kitten matched my image of Hobbs, with the same uncomfortable expression on its face, holding its eyes tightly closed, and at any moment I expected his eyes to open up. He felt the same too as I brushed my arm over him, with soft and fuzzy fur and the matching auburn swirly patterns over a white coat. The same white and auburn coloured face with a curious look upon his face, and even the lining of his mouth. It all matched, like a photographic copy. And then, after a few more movements, the kitten's eyes opened and saw me. I expected him to leap out the girl's arms and dash away before I could catch him. He didn't. And even more surprisingly, the kitten seemed to recognize me and batted my nose as I leaned into its paw, letting him sniff my face. That face. It was Hobbs. It could not have belonged to any other kitten. After I saw the kitten in his conscious state, I became overtaken by the thought of how the kitten that belonged to my ex-roommate Andrew could have possibly landed in this mysterious stranger's hands, and I lashed out at her in anger. "Have you lost your mind? You would have killed him while he was wide awake. How could you possibly do this to him?" The cultist girl had a rather unapologetic expression on her face, even ignoring my anger entirely. "He seems to take a liking to you. Are you his owner?" "No, I'm not. I take care of him," I said, with the kitten still patting my arms with a bewildered look on his face. I just wanted to snatch the poor soul out of the mysterious girl's arms and rush the hell out of there without turning back. But then suddenly, another unexpected move. The girl stepped slowly towards me and then leaned down as I held my arms out, and the kitten quickly scrambled out of her arms into mine. Now that I had him, I couldn't let him fall back into the girl's hands, and I stared into the girl's motionless face with the exact opposite expression. "No cat deserves to die in your pointless ritual." She was stirred by no attempt at reason, and what she said next perhaps shocked me more because of the hint of emotion it carried. "Such a shame. He needs a more deserving owner." I suddenly felt empowered by her answer, like I could actually rattle what little emotion she felt. "Why the hell are you killing cats? What the hell is this? You and the rest of your people will answer for this, as to why I have to save the owner's kitten from this premature burial." I was drained, and began panting from yelling for this brief period of time because I felt so strongly attached to my words. But the problem with these words is the amount of attention they drew from the crowd, to the extent I perhaps not wished it. I was now surrounded on all sides by at least a dozen curious faces. They were now blocking my exit like the cats in the ritual circle. Every emotionless face with the same uniform cold expression was just so infuriating. "Leave now," one of the boys in a suit bellowed at me. "You are disturbing the cycle, Tainted One. We do not require your presence," a younger girl told me. And this certainly disturbed me most of all. What in the hell was the cycle? My jaw dropped, and I lost all words that had come to my mind before now. I could only stare between two of the dark figures standing before me at the poor helpless cat in a cage that was about to be slaughtered. I knew in my mind that these cats were being slaughtered and not humans, but there was just something so incredibly unsettling about knowing that these creatures' lives were being cut short in such an awful way. In a way, I could relate it to myself. What would it look like for me? What would I feel? And with that thought, I could feel the temptation of my next thought, a scheme that was forming in my head. But I tried desperately to fight it. Why did I believe that I could rescue the cats in the cages at the risk of Hobbs' life? I was responsible for him, and I'd be making a terrible risk, and I'd probably be cornered by the disturbing figurines in human flesh, and they would eat my insides just like the rabbits. But no, that's not what happened to those rabbits. I never saw any guts. I couldn't possibly know that. I must be losing my mind, I remember telling myself, and I was visibly hitting myself on the head trying to wake up and slapping my cheeks, whatever it was in my power to do. I forgot about the kitten that was between my arms, and I pushed two of the figures in the circle out the way to chase the sprawling cat. They didn't fight me, they simply left me to my duties to chase the kitten down. Try as I might, I couldn't catch up with Hobbs as he faded into the darkness. Now it was just me and the chanting in the distance, growing louder, more aggressive, more evil. I prepared myself for the exact moment another blade met with the cat flesh, and the horrible howling cry as I covered my ears and listened to the sound of my heartbeat, racing as fast as it possibly could. "Wake up," I told myself. Still no sounds of cars in the distance. "Please, wake up." There was nothing but the noise of my chattering teeth and the sound of my panting with the screeching cries of dying cats, with the chanting growing to a roar in the background. It was closing in on me, that terrible sound, sucking me back into their ritual. Why did such a scream have to be so unbearable? I just couldn't take it that horrible noise growing even louder still, growing louder. It was beyond unbearable. Louder! I finally snapped, and I left Hobbs, or at least the kitten deemed to be his clone, in the shadows to rot in that place. I was running now, and I panicked when I finally realized that there were no cars. There were none, even at the next intersection and beyond off in the distance. When I finally came to the bridge over the freeway, my body became completely paralyzed. I could not move. I've never seen such an empty freeway before in my life. I'd seen empty busy roads such as these, sure, but not for nearly as such an extended period of time as this. Just to see the empty lanes as far as the eye could see towards the hills off in the distance, disappearing only over the curvature of the earth. Even in movies set in the zombie apocalypse, there would be hundreds and thousands of overturned cars in sight, and an obvious reason for it known. But this? Complete emptiness? It was just completely unexplainable to describe the emotion. There are simply no words for what it feels like to discover the impossible appeared to have invaded reality. It made as little sense as anything else I'd encountered that night, and from my viewpoint, I could see more parked cars over in the university shopping centre and on the streets. It was the creepiest feeling that I'd ever felt. Those parked cars told a different story as to what I knew to be true. Everything is normal. There is nothing wrong. It defied and twisted logic, just like the concave road appearing as to bend for all eternity. As I remained as solid as a statue, I knew that someone was standing behind me, but I just couldn't move. I couldn't take my eyes off the barren emptiness that lay beneath my feet, barren far into the distance toward a single vanishing point. "It's too late now. You're trapped in this world," I heard a girl's voice tell me. "You and the kitten will never leave this place." I struggled to turn and face her, but I still found myself in a stun lock, My body's muscles were not responding. I felt a sudden, unexplainable surge of warmth that extended up from my toes towards my head. It felt so peaceful. A relieving, soothing, powerful calm that enveloped me in such a way that I can only describe it as complete solitude. It felt as though I had accepted my fate with grace, but I was still paralyzed. Not a muscle in my body would move on command. "You must come back," she urged me, and I was overcome with the need to yell again, but I knew I would not be able to muster a sound and gave up. I was in dismay. Is it possible she didn't know I was in a state of complete paralysis? Suddenly, my answer was revealed as I can hear a car engine fast approaching as it squelched to a halt behind me. A car door opened up, and I was hurled into the back seat by two of the ritual boys as my joints still did not budge. I was lobbed just like a statue. I had been reduced to an inanimate object. The car engine whirred and my eyes began flooding. I had not cried, albeit joy or sadness, in years. I was mesmerized by the tears, as they had no hot or coldness about them. I could simply not feel the tears. I could not tell what my emotion was right now. It was just all too confusing. Was I really here? Was I real? Were these ritualists real? Was the ritual even real? Was I ever in reality to begin with this night? Or if so, where did it all go so horribly wrong? I still felt solitude, but at once I felt an incredible force. A piercing headache that clawed into my brain, scrambling my thoughts, squeezing them. It juggled them around, beat them to a pulp, just like any act of bullying I could describe inflicted upon my head. It all came at once as quickly as receiving a splinter scraping your hand along the wood. It attacked me from the inside out. It felt as though the car ride was lasting for days, turning seconds into hours, warping the duration of time in ways that are impossible to visualize. I just felt so lost in it all. Still none of my joints would move, not even an inch, and I stared out the corner of my frozen eye sockets at a glimpse of the palm of my hand, hoping to give some definitive sign of movement. But I could no longer tell how long I had been frozen in this way, how long the night had lasted, or what day it was. But they were still in the car, those cultists, the driver and car zooming off into oblivion. I could see them in my peripherals. No one made a sound, and since I couldn't turn my head, I was pinned staring out the side window, watching the passing buildings, props, trees, light posts, trash cans. I couldn't differentiate them anymore. It was all one big sweeping blur. Because of how oblivious I was to time, I can't tell how long it took exactly, but eventually a non-existent force let me lay down, and for the briefest moment before I drifted to sleep, I swear I could feel something small and fuzzy nestle between the palms of my hands. We never arrived at our destination, or at least I don't think we did. To be honest, I still don't know where I am, or how I'm even typing this. You might be wondering then, how did you manage to write anything before this then? When did your paralysis leave you? What type of prank are you pulling on us? Where are you now? I was always bad at pulling pranks, and I was never the type that dared to dream. Doing something stupid instead, like steal a pencil away from my classmate's desk and watch them act baffled at its disappearance. But a prank like this? No. I would not imagine. I'm so shocked at everything I've told you that I'm now convinced it was all real, and in fact, not an act of my imagination. I'm not crazy, and my reality, my only reality, has been reduced to a blur and shadows, and yes, my paralysis faded off when I awoke, and it faded along with the world I left behind. If I stop for a long while, the kitten still follows me, although I refuse to still call the creature Hobbs. I still hear their chanting, but it's always off in the distance, so taking care of my roommate's cat is proving not to be much of a problem now. I never see the other cats anymore, only when I close my eyes. It often makes me stop and wonder what my roommate would be thinking of what has happened to me and where I am now. In quiet moments, I take a seat on the ground that smeared the canvas of the earth. I can see the convicting eyes of those black cats staring into me, fading away as I reopen my eyes. I try to keep my eyes open for long lengths of time, but eventually, I see them again, and it haunts me.